In Shemot, Exodus, Perek Chav Hei, Pasuk Chet, it states that Hashem said, Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make me a sanctuary, a Mishkan, that I may dwell in it. Bnei Israel made the Mishkan in the Midbar, the wilderness, and it traveled with them to a number of places. The place where the Mishkan was erected the longest was here in Shiloh. So we are standing here in ancient Shiloh, the home of the Mishkan for 369 years. Ancient Shiloh is at the foot of the mountain of the modern settlement of Shiloh. Beginning in 1978, today it is the home of approximately 2,500 people. Often the exact location of an ancient site is unknown, but archaeologists are certain about this location. In Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, Perek Chav Aleph, it specifically states that Shiloh was Tzafona leBetel, Mizracha HaShemesh leMesilah HaOla meBetel Shechema, Uminegev leLevona. Shiloh was north of Betel, east of the road leading from Betel to Shechem, and south of Livona. You can see clearly on the map that this is the location of Shiloh today. As we enter the town of Shiloh, there is an interactive, movable replica of what had been the Choshen, or the breastplate, of the high priest's garments. It consists of 4 rows of 3 cubes across. If you look at them, you see the names of the 12 tribes, 1 tribe per cube. If you turn all of them at one time, each cube now depicts a picture of the Mishkan, its kelim, or its parts, and the garments of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. One more turn, and you'll see pictures of the Lametet Melachot, the 39 law categories of work prohibited on Shabbat, which is based on the work that was done while building the Mishkan. And finally, with the last turn, the historical sites in this ancient city are shown. For all the years that the Mishkan was here, Bnei Israel were obligated to come here 3 times a year, on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. They came on a pilgrimage. The question arose in the Mishnah as to who was eligible for making these pilgrimages. If a child was able to walk a substantial distance while holding his father's hand, the father was obliged to bring him, as we see here in this model. There are finds on this site from numerous time periods, starting with the Middle Bronze Age at about 1800 BCE, when the Canaanites, the Canaanim, were here, all the way through the Arab period of the 13th century, with almost continuous settlement. A Second Temple era burial site is off to the right, showing that there had been Jewish settlement here at that time. This had been a multi-generational burial site hewn into the bedrock. There is an outer courtyard and 2 caves. A relatively new exhibition houses a hologram depicting the Mishkan and its components. It shows the layout of the Mishkan. The courtyard was 100 amot by 50 amot. The difference between this Mishkan and the one in the wilderness were the stone walls. In the desert, the walls were temporary since they needed to be dismantleable. Because the Mishkan in Shiloh was to last for a long duration, the walls were made of stone. The Mizbeach, or the altar, was in the outer courtyard along with the kior, or the wash basin. Behind that was a closed structure, or the Ohel Moed. Inside, along its southern wall, was a golden menorah. Across from it was the Shulchan HaPanim, or the table of the showbreads. Lastly, across from the entrance was the incense altar, or the Mizbeach HaKetoret. This area was reserved for only the Kohanim. The Parochet, or the curtain, separated the Heichal from the Kodesh Kedoshim, or the Holy of Holies. This area was devoid of people. Once a year on Yom Kippur, the Kohen HaGadol, or the high priest, was permitted to enter. In this area was the Aron HaBrit, the Holy Ark, with the Luchot HaBrit, or the 10 Commandments, inside. As we walk towards the old settlement, we pass a few ancient buildings. The first building is a church that had originally been built during the 5th to the 6th century, during the Byzantine era. After the Second Temple period, this area became Christian, and remains of 4 churches have been uncovered. Christians revere this area as well. About 100 years ago, a group of Danish excavators came here and wanted to use a church. This ancient church had been a very large one. As the excavators had no need for such a large church, they renovated a smaller section of the original. Outside of the building are remnants of ancient mosaic floors that had been part of the larger church. On the floor in the front of the church was an inscription in Greek. Also uncovered is a mosaic of a Magen David. At that time, a Magen David was not a symbol of Judaism. That began in the 14th century. The next building was a mosque. This was built over a larger 6th century church. That church was built over a 4th century church, which may have been built over an ancient shul. Here, too, ancient mosaic floors have been exposed, including several Greek inscriptions. One inscription specifically mentions that this is the location of Shiloh, adding additional proof of this location. As we begin the ascent to the Tel, remains of a large villa from the Byzantine era between the 4th and the 6th century are visible. The stones are smooth, which can be contrasted to those from the Canaanite era. The gate to the structure has 2 large vertical stones. A circular stone was rolled in between to seal the entrance. Remains of an ancient oil press are on the other side. This was a very fertile area, with olive oil and wine its main crops. Remains of a massive Canaanite Middle Bronze Era wall from 1800 to 1500 BCE can be seen just past the villa. These rough stones contrast to the villa's smooth stones of 2,000 years later. This is part of the larger wall that was built all around the Tel. A little further up, off to the western side, archaeologists discovers ruins from the Iron Age I era, from 1200 to 1000 BCE, or when Bnei Israel occupied here. Dozens of large storage jars, used probably for oil and wine, were unearthed. Pottery belonging to Bnei Israel was known as collar-rimmed jars. Perhaps there were storage rooms of items needed in the service of the Mishkan, and many of these rooms are seen here. They are located just outside and below the Canaanite wall. One special type of pottery is known specifically as a Shilo pottery. It has 12 handles, with each handle representing one of the 12 tribes. Remains of excavated items are found in the museum on the top of the Tel. Excavations in this area also show that there had been a fire that destroyed this place. The date of the fire is about the year of 1050 BCE, which corresponds to the destruction of Shiloh. The Mishkan here had been set up 14 years after Bnei Israel had entered Eretz Israel and had conquered a good portion of the land. Once this had been achieved, it says in Sefer Yoshua, the book of Joshua, Perek Yud-chet, V'yikahalu kol adat b'nei Yisrael Shilo, v'yeshkinu sham et ohel moed, v'ha'aretz nichbasha lifneihem. And the entire community of the children of Israel assembled at Shiloh and erected the sanctuary there. And the land had been conquered before them. Actually, only part of the land had been conquered, and Yehoshua sent out the other 7 Shvatim from Shiloh to conquer and take hold of their territories. From the view of Tel Shiloh, one could see numerous vineyards. When the modern settlement of Shiloh first began, the mayor realized that if you don't use the land, you can lose it. So he had vineyards planted all around. This is reminiscent of the holiday of Tu B'Av, the 15th day of Av, when young maidens wearing white dresses would come to the vineyards of Shiloh. The young men would come along and take them as their wives. The Mishkan was the place for pilgrimages and sacrifices, but one of its best-known stories is that of Chana. Chana was married to Elkanah, but she didn't have any children. Disheartened, when she came to Shiloh with her husband on the pilgrimage, she went to the Mishkan and offered deep, heartfelt, silent prayer, begging for a child. Until now, this sort of prayer was unknown, and Eli HaKohen mistaken her as a drunk. Chana explained her predicament and promised that if Hashem answered her prayer, she would dedicate her son to Hashem. Eli promised her that it was to be, and sure enough, Chana had a son who she named Shmuel, and she brought him to Eli to be raised in the house of Hashem. From Chana, we learn the means and the importance of deep, feeling, individual, personal prayer. As one descends from the top of the Tel to the north, as if leaving the ancient city, the question as to where exactly had the Mishkan been is asked. There are 3 possibilities given to its location. One is near the parking lot outside of the Tel, but this was quickly disregarded. A second possibility is at the top of the Tel, but there doesn't appear to be a large enough area for the Mishkan to have been there. Finally, the third choice is here, to the north, where there is a large open area, an area large enough to have been 100 amot by 50 amot. Excavations had not yielded any definite proof. However, there are two parallel lines of bedrock measuring 100 mamot, and they are 50 amot apart, the exact measurements of the Mishkan. Most assume that the Mishkan was here because this is after the actual city. That is the way it was depicted in Shmuel Aleph, Samuel 1, Perek Dalid, when it stated, V'ha'ish ba'al hagid ba'ir, v'tizak kol ha'ir, v'yishma Eli et kol ha'sa'aka, v'ha'ish maher v'yagvo v'yaged le'Eli. When a messenger came with the bad news that the Aron was captured, it stated that he first came to the city, and the city let out a cry. Eli HaKohen heard the cry, and then the messenger told it directly to Eli. If someone has such an important news, wouldn't he tell it to the person who's in charge first? In this case, the messenger had to go through the town in order to get Eli at the Mishkan. This shows that the Mishkan was almost certainly here. Eli was the last Kohen Gadol to serve here. His sons who followed him, Chafni and Pinchas, were known to be corrupt, wicked men. The Pelishtim, the Philistines, had attacked Bnei Israel at a place called Eben Ezra. This was located directly west of here. When Bnei Israel realized they were not succeeding in the battle, they thought that if they brought the Aron with them, the Aron would help them with the war. However, the opposite happened. Bnei Israel lost the battle, and the Aron was captured. The Pelishtim took it with them to their cities until they finally returned it. But before they did that, they had continued the battle and brought the battle to Shiloh. Shiloh was destroyed, and with it the Mishkan. Eli died from hearing the bad news. The Mishkan had been here for 369 years. It is permissible to walk around this site, even though it was once a holy place. Shiloh never had the level of holiness that the Beit HaMikdash had in Yerushalayim. When one sacrificed in the Beit HaMikdash, one was limited as to where he was able to eat that sacrifice. It was more lenient in Shiloh. The Kedusha, or the holiness, did not last, as even though the Mishkan was here for 369 years, it was but one stop of 5 places where the Mishkan had been. Even though the site did not retain its holiness, people come here to remember what it once was. Many come here to offer heartfelt prayers in the hope that their prayers will be answered the way Hashem had answered Chana's. And so may it be.